Call me by your name. 5. But it was the gold necklace and the Star of David with the golden mezuzah on his neck that told me here was something more compelling than anything I wanted from him. For it bound us and reminded me that, while everything else conspired to make us the two most dissimilar beings, this at least transcended all differences. I saw his star almost immediately during his first day with us, and from that moment on I knew that what mystified me and made me want to seek out his friendship without ever hoping to find ways to dislike him was larger than anything either of us could ever want from the other, larger and therefore better than his soul, my body, or earth itself. Staring at his neck with his star and telltale amulet was like staring at something timeless, ancestral, immortal in me, in him, in both of us, begging to be rekindled and brought back from its millenary sleep. What baffled me was that he didn't seem to care or notice that I wore one too, just as he probably didn't care or notice each time my eyes wandered along his bathing suit and tried to make out the contour of what made us brothers in the desert. With the exception of my family, he was probably the only other Jew who had ever set foot in B. But unlike us, he let you see it from the very start. We were not conspicuous Jews. We wore our Judaism as people do almost everywhere in the world, under the shirt, not hidden, but tucked away. Jews of discretion, to use my mother's words. To see someone proclaim his Judaism on his neck as Oliver did when he grabbed one of our bikes and headed into town with his shirt wide open shocked us as much as it taught us we could do the same and get away with it. I tried imitating him a few times, but I was too self-conscious, like someone trying to feel natural while walking about naked in the locker room, only to end up aroused by his own nakedness. In town, I tried flaunting my Judaism with the silent bluster that comes less from arrogance than from repressed shame. Not him. It's not that he never thought about being Jewish or about the life of Jews in a Catholic country. Sometimes we spoke about just this topic during those long afternoons when both of us would put aside work and enjoy chatting while the entire household and guests had all drifted into every available bedroom to rest for a few hours. He had lived long enough in a small town in New England to know what it felt like to be odd Jew out, but Judaism never troubled him the way it troubled me, nor was it the subject of an abiding metaphysical discomfort with himself and the world. It did not even harbor the mystical, unspoken promise of redemptive brotherhood. And perhaps this was why he wasn't ill at ease with being Jewish and didn't constantly have to pick at it, the way children pick at scabs they wish would go away. He was okay with being Jewish. He was okay with himself, the way he was okay with his body, with his looks, and with his antique backhand, with his choice of books, music, films, friends. He was okay with losing his prized Mont Blanc pen. I can buy another one just like that. He was okay with criticism too. He showed my father a few pages he was proud of having written. My father told him his insights into Heraclitus were brilliant but needed firming up, that he needed to accept the paradoxical nature of the philosopher's thinking, not simply explain it away. He was okay with firming things up. He was okay with paradox. Back to the drawing board, he was okay with the drawing board as well. He invited my young aunt for a tete-a-tete midnight gita spin in our motorboat. She declined. That was okay. He tried again a few days later, was turned down again, and again made light of it. She too was okay with it, and had she spent another week with us, would probably have been okay with going out to sea for a midnight gita that could easily have lasted till sunrise. Only once during his very first few days did I get a sense that this willful but accommodating, laid-back, water over my back, unflappable, unfazed 24-year-old who was so heedlessly okay with so many things in life was in fact a thoroughly alert, cold, sagacious judge of character and situations. Nothing he did or said was unpremeditated. He saw through everybody, but he saw through them precisely because the first thing he looked for in people was the very thing he had seen in himself and may not have wished others to see. He was, as my mother was scandalized to learn one day, a supreme poker player who'd escape into a town at night twice a week or so to play a few hands. This was why, to our complete surprise, he insisted on opening a bank account on the very first day of his arrival. None of our residents had ever had a local bank account. Most didn't have a penny. It had happened during a lunch when my father had invited a journalist who had dabbled in philosophy in his youth and wanted to show that, though he had never written about Heraclitus, he could still spar on any matter under the sun. He and Oliver didn't hit it off. Afterward, my father had said, "A very witty man, damn clever too." "Do you really think so, Pro?" Oliver interrupted, unaware that my father, while very easygoing himself, did not always like being contradicted, much less being called Pro, though he went along with both. "Yes, I do," insisted my father. "Well, I'm not sure I agree at all. I find him arrogant, dull, flat-footed, and coarse. He uses humor and a lot of your voice." Oliver mimicked the man's gravitas and broad gestures to nudge his audience because he is totally incapable of arguing a case. The voice thing is so over the top. Pro. People laugh at his humor, not because people laugh at his humor not because he is funny, but because he telegraphs his desire to be funny. His humor is nothing more than a way of winning over people he can't persuade. If you look at him when you're speaking, he always looks away. He's not listening. He's just itching to say things he's rehearsed while you are speaking and wants to say before he forgets them. How could anyone intuit a matter of someone's thinking unless he himself was already familiar with the same mode of thinking? How could he perceive so many devious turns in others unless he had practiced them himself? What struck me was not just his amazing gifts for reading people, but rummaging inside them and digging out the precise configuration of their personality, but his ability to intuit things in exactly the way I myself might have intuited them. This, in the end, was what drew me to him, with a compulsion that override desire or friendship or allurements of a common religion. "How about catching a movie?" he blurted out one evening when we were all sitting together, as if he suddenly hit on a solution to what promised to be a dull night indoors. We had just left the dinner table where my father was, as his habit these days, had been urging me to try to go out with friends more often, especially in the evening. It bordered on a lecture. Oliver was still new with us and knew no one in town, so I must have seemed as good a movie partner as any. But he had asked his questions in far too breezy and spontaneous a manner, as though he wanted me to everyone else in the living room to know that he was hardly invested in going to the movies and could just as readily stay home and go over his manuscript. The carefree inflection of his offer, however, was also a wink aimed at my father. He was only pretending to have come up with the idea, in fact, without letting me suspect it. He was picking up on my father's advice at the dinner table and was offering to go for my benefit alone. I smiled, Not at the offer, but at the double-edged maneuver. He immediately caught my smile, and having caught it, smiled back, almost in self-mockery, sensing that if he gave any sign of guessing I'd seen through his rust, he's been confirming his guilt. But that refusing to own up to it, after I'd made clear I'd accepted it, would indict him even more. So he smiled to confess he'd been caught, but also to show he was a good enough sport to own up to it and still enjoy going to the movies together. The whole thing thrilled me.